Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Wolfram Lacher. He is a senior associate with the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. He's the author of a very timely book. It's called Libya's Fragmentation, and he joins us from Berlin. Thank you very much, Mr. Lacher, for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, as your book says, Libya is more divided than ever. The west of the country, including the capital Tripoli, is controlled by forces allied with the government of national accord led by Fayez al-Sarraj and recognized by the United Nations. The east is a stronghold of Khalifa Haftar, who enjoys the support of the United Arab Emirates and Egypt, among others. After besieging Tripoli for a year, Haftar is now forced to withdraw after Turkey intervened in support of Sarraj, and both camps are now facing off near the strategic town of Sirte. So a big question, is Libya about to partition?
Well, I think that for the first time in the history of Libya's conflicts of the last 10 years, there is actually a real risk that things will ultimately move towards partition, but we're not quite there yet. Right now, the acute risk is that the conflict will take an entirely new turn with potential intervention by Egypt, which would mean that the conflict is no longer a proxy war as it was until now, but it could evolve into an open confrontation between different states in Libya itself. There is also the possibility that this will ultimately become a frozen conflict, and that could eventually lead towards partition. But we're talking about medium-term scenarios there.
Right. You mentioned Egypt, and I mentioned the town of Sirte. The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said that if the forces allied with the Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj were moving towards Sirte, this would cross a red line and prompt Egypt to intervene. I mean, and this would mean Egypt possibly in confrontation with Turkey directly. I mean, how serious is this? Is this just talk? Or could this happen, actually?
I think the risk of escalation, of a direct confrontation, is there. I think we would do well to take President Sisi's threats seriously, because right now we're in a situation where there is a lot of uncertainty on both sides, in Turkey and in Egypt, about how serious these threats of escalation are. There is uncertainty about to what extent the other side is ready to commit military assets, is able to commit military assets, to what extent it would be able to sustain an escalation financially, but also in terms of politically with regard to its local constituencies if it suffers losses. And so Russia, Egypt and Turkey are playing a game of chicken. They're trying to test how far the other side is willing to go. And amid high uncertainty, that game involves a serious risk of escalation.
Right. Were you surprised by Turkey's decisive and, I would say, very open intervention backing the government of national accord? Let's just recall that Khalifa Haftar besieged the capital, Tripoli, for a year, and many people thought that he would gain control, and then suddenly things have turned around totally.
Yes, I think that a lot of people were surprised. I personally was also surprised by an intervention of this scale and an open intervention. You have to bear in mind that last year, the entire campaign by Haftar to seize control of Tripoli was supported covertly by the UAE, by Russia, by Egypt. Turkey took intervention to an entirely different level by intervening openly, right? And I know that at the time, very few people in Western governments expected this kind of intervention by Turkey. I think the extent to which this has really shifted the balance of power has surprised a lot of people, yes.
Right. I want to go back to also the fact that there is no international mediation efforts. I mean, the UN Special Envoy position is empty now. Hassan Salameh left a month ago. So you hear everyone, European countries, the US, saying we need a political solution, but there's no negotiation at the international level. How can you expect a political solution in that situation?
Well, it's actually quite difficult to see a meaningful UN-led process, or even, a meaningful political process at all happen under the current circumstances. Because on the one hand, we have Russia and Turkey, who've acquired unprecedented influence in Libya and who would certainly want to exert decisive influence over any negotiations. But at the same time, a sustainable settlement is probably not in Turkey's and Russia's interest, because it would reduce their influence and it could actually threaten their military presence in Libya. And then we have all sorts of other states who want to prevent a Russian-Turkish arrangement on Libya from happening. The US, France, the UAE, Egypt, and others who might want to support a UN-led process against a Turkish-Russian process. And in these circumstances, I can't imagine how either of the two could succeed. It's a situation that leads us to paralysis in Libya. It leads towards a frozen conflict.
Right. You mentioned France. I mean, France officially recognizes the government of Fayez al-Sarraj. However, it has also supported, covertly at least, but sometimes even diplomatically, Khalifa Haftar. And this has led to a quite vivid war of words with Turkey in recent days. What do you make of France's attitude vis-à-vis Libya?
Well, France has been politically aligned with the United Arab Emirates in supporting Haftar for years now. And for a long time, the French policy towards the conflict in Tripoli was to give this war a chance to see whether Haftar could win. Even after it became clear that this war would be very protracted, that it would cause a lot of destruction, this was the French policy. And now this war that the French government wanted and supported has given rise to unprecedented foreign intervention in Libya, and threatens to destabilize the situation, the region even more. But instead of reviewing the policy that produced such disastrous results, the French government persists and tries to isolate Turkey internationally, while at the same time remaining silent on Emirati intervention, Russian intervention in Libya. So it's hard to take this French criticism of Turkey's role seriously, given all that we know about France's support to Haftar's war over the last year or so.
I mean, you mentioned Russia. There's a lot of talk about this private security company, Wagner, intervening. You mentioned the UAE. How much do they intervene? I mean, obviously, Turkey isn't hiding it. What about them?
Well, I mean, the UAE have been supporting Haftar's war from the beginning with combat drones, then with air defense systems, Russian-produced air defense systems. Russia started deploying mercenaries in Tripoli from September of last year onwards, and these mercenaries were very important in turning the balance of power in Haftar's favor back then. And most recently, a month ago, Russia deployed a large number of fighter jets in Haftar's favor to support Haftar. It hasn't used them extensively yet, but they are there. They are in Jufra in central Libya, ready to be used. So yes, Russia and the Emirates play an absolutely decisive role in propping up Haftar at the moment, and without their support, Haftar's lines of defense in central Libya would fall immediately.
Right. Do you think Haftar still has a chance? Because many people have said, well, he didn't succeed militarily, so there's no way for him to stay, at least in power, maybe in his eastern stronghold.
I think what we're seeing right now is that on both sides of this conflict, we had alliances of convenience. Haftar led a coalition of forces who all hoped to sweep to power with him in Tripoli, and we're seeing now tensions emerge within these alliances on both sides, including in Haftar's alliance in the east. I would expect that a frozen conflict that continues at a low level with a continuing threat of escalation in central Libya would be in Haftar's favor, because certainly he cannot lead his coalition to a settlement. He would lose his influence in eastern Libya if a settlement were to happen, and he is not an acceptable negotiating partner for his adversaries on the other side.
Right. Wolfram Lacher, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for watching this interview. Stay tuned for more news here on France 24.